practices. Key Action 2 is all about cooperation and collaboration. It offers opportunities for organisations from different countries and different sectors to work together to share good practice and innovation and to improve the provision for learners. The UK National Agency, which is a partnership between the British Council and Ecoris UK, is responsible for managing strategic partnership projects, the decentralised action under Key Action 2. Strategic partnerships in the field of youth are managed by the team at Ecoris UK. Other types of project under Key Action 2, such as knowledge and sector skills alliances, are managed centrally by the Executive Agency of the European Commission. We won't be talking about these type of projects during the webinar today, but you can find more information in Part B of the programme guide from page 121 onwards. Strategic partnerships are cooperation projects which allow organisations to work together to improve the quality of education and training provision, tackle common issues, and share or develop innovative practice. As you're aware, one organisation applies for funding on behalf of the whole partnership, and if the project is approved, this partner has overall responsibility for managing the funding and is accountable to the national agency for the project. Strategic partnerships are flexible in terms of what they can entail and in size. This means that there is flexibility in terms of what activities you implement, as long as your application can demonstrate that these activities are the most appropriate to achieve the objectives defined for the project. Projects can be of one of the following two types. Strategic partnerships for developing innovation. These projects are expected to develop innovative outputs and undertake intensive dissemination and exploitation activities. Strategic partnerships supporting innovation can request specific funding for intellectual output and multiplier events in order to support the delivery of their objectives. The other aspect is strategic partnerships supporting exchange of good practices. The main objective of these projects is to allow organisations to develop and reinforce networks, increase their capacity to operate at a transnational level, and exchange ideas, practices and methods. Depending on their objectives, projects may also develop tangible outputs and are still expected to disseminate the results of their activities in a way that is proportionate to the aims and scope of the project. These results and activities will be co-financed through the standard project management and implementation budget, and no separate funding will be available to develop intellectual output or multiplier events. The type of strategic partnership to be developed will need to be selected within the application form. It's therefore important to give careful consideration before applying to the type of project that is best suited to your objectives and the experience and capacity of your partnership. Also, when preparing your project and choosing your partners, excuse me, it's important to carefully consider the experience and capacity of the participating organisations. Whilst large-scale projects are supported, it's also possible to deliver small-scale cooperation projects. The grant will vary depending on the size and scale of the project, and I will talk more about this when we look at the budget section of the application form. There are opportunities to develop strategic partnerships focusing in one field of education and training, or to develop cross-sector projects. You can find more information about this on our website, but in this webinar we will be focusing specifically on strategic partnerships for youth. Projects focusing on youth can deliver a wide range of activities around topics such as developing, testing, implementing and promoting innovative approaches in youth work, for example, exchanging methods for the professional development of youth workers. They can also promote the empowerment, participation and the active citizenship of young people. And finally, they can focus on promoting entrepreneurship education and social entrepreneurship among young people. When devising your project activities, you may wish to consult the website of Salto Youth Resource Centres. This website provides practical online tools for youth and youth working. You may wish to look through these if, for instance, you want to check that your project idea is innovative, or if you were looking for additional ideas that could be helpful for your project. You can also refer to the examples provided in the programme guide, that's pages 111 and 279, and ensure that your project idea fits with the action priorities listed on pages 107 to 110. It is important to link your KA2 project to the overarching European priorities. and show the added value of carrying out your project on a European level. When doing so, it's important to keep the general objectives of the Erasmus Plus programme in mind. More information about that can be found in Part A of the Erasmus Plus programme guide, as well as the important following features: recognition and validation of skills and qualifications, for example, Youth Pass in the field of youth; dissemination and exploitation of project results, for example, the use of the Erasmus Plus logo, as well as the Erasmus Plus project results platform, which is a contractual requirement for KA2 projects; open access requirement for educational materials, documents and media produced through Erasmus Plus; international dimension, i.e. cooperation with organisations from different countries; multilingualism, by requesting funding for linguistic support for long-term teaching training assignments; equity and inclusion, for example, by facilitating the access to learners with disadvantaged backgrounds and fewer opportunities compared to their peers; protection and safety of participants, by making sure all participants are in possession of a European health insurance card, for example. In addition to these features, in order to be funded, a strategic partnership must address either at least one horizontal priority for strategic partnerships, an overview of which can be found on pages 107 to 108 in the programme guide, or at least one field-specific priority relevant to the field of youth, that's on pages 108 to 110 of the programme guide. Where a project addresses a horizontal priority, it's still important to show how the project will impact on the field of youth. In 2016, projects addressing the horizontal priority of inclusive education, training and youth will be considered highly relevant. However, in all cases, projects will need to clearly demonstrate how the project objectives and planned activities will address the action priority or priorities selected. Strategic partnerships in the field of youth also support the development of transnational youth initiatives fostering social commitment and entrepreneurial spirit, jointly carried out by two or more groups of young people from different countries. For example, these initiatives may concern the establishment of social enterprises, associations, clubs, NGOs, or actions for the benefit of local communities like support to vulnerable groups. A youth initiative is a project initiated, set up and carried out by young people themselves. It gives young people the chance to try out ideas through initiatives which give them an opportunity to be directly and actively involved in planning and carrying out a project. It's important to note that a youth initiative must be transnational and that the groups need to be from different countries. They may be supported by a coach. The coach remained outside the youth initiative but supports a group of young people in the preparation, implementation and evaluation of their project based on the needs of the groups. You can find out more information about transnational youth initiatives on page 284 of the programme guide. So what is a Key Action 2 strategic partnership? One organisation applies to their country's national agency on behalf of the entire partnership. Projects can be of different sizes, but you will need minimum 2 partners, that is including the lead organisation, from 2 different programme countries in the case of projects consisting only of youth organisations. You can find the definition of a youth organisation on your handout. Projects involving partners from other fields require 3 partners from 3 different programme countries. The lead or applicant organisation must always be from a programme country, although partner countries can participate if their participation brings clear added value to the project. Projects can last from 6 up to 36 months. You need to choose the duration of the project at application stage, and this cannot be changed. However, the latest possible end date is the 31st of August 2019. Projects can be different sizes and funding will reflect this as you will build up your project budget from a series of unit costs per activity up to a maximum total budget. The maximum budget is a variable amount defined by multiplying €12,500 per month for the duration of the project, with a maximum of €450,000 for 36 months. There is no formal requirement for match funding in the project budget, although the principle of co-financing applies. So you should see page 242 of the programme guide for more information about that. Once you have decided what it is that you want to do, you have set up a partnership and thought about how to address different European priorities, you will need to complete the following 2 registration steps. You will need to register on ECAS first. ECAS is the European Commission Authentication Service, and you will need to register here to use any type of external European Commission tool. We have a video guide on our website which will talk you through how to do this, and you can find the link to it on your handout. You will then need to obtain a participant identification code to access the participant portal. The participant portal is a single entry point for the electronic administration of EU-funded projects related to Erasmus+. You will be prompted to provide information about your organisation, as well as upload documents related to your organisation. These documents are needed to prove the legal status and financial capacity of your organisation, and it's essential that the information on these documents matches the information on the portal. If your organisation already has a PIC, you should use that and not create a new one. Please make sure all the information is still up to date. If your organisation does not have a PIC, and please double check, you will need to obtain one. Please note that if you are applying for a new PIC, it's important to make sure that you register onto the correct participant portal, as there are different ones. The link provided in the handout is for the Education, Audiovisual, Culture, Citizenship and Volunteering portal. However, if you just do a search on the internet, you might come out on the Research participant portal. You can find further information about the application process in Part C of the programme guide. Download the partner mandate templates from our website and have them filled in by your respective partners and signed by both parties. Make sure that the information such as the name of the organisation, address and legal representative on the partner mandate is identical to the information in the application form. Otherwise, the partner mandate will not be accepted. After the brainstorming and the registration, you can move on to the application form itself. The application form is an eForm and will need to be submitted online by the applicant organisation by the round 2 deadline of the 26th of April 2016. Please keep in mind that this is 11 AM UK time, as the deadline for applications is generally 12 AM Brussels time. You will need to use your PIC as well as your partner's PICs to fill out the application form. It's therefore important that the PIC information is correct, as it will be used throughout the lifetime of your project, and it's your responsibility to keep the information up to date. To make sure you have the correct application form in front of you, you should double check that it states Call 2016, Round 2, for the 26th of April deadline. Applications to the UK National Agency should also be completed in English. We're now going to go into the actual application form and run through it with you. As we go along, we'll show you how to fill in some of the parts, as well as give you some hints and tips based on feedback from previous rounds. We will be using a test application form, as using an eForm from one of the previous rounds would contravene data protection rules. So give me a second. I'm just going to switch over to the application form, so you'll be able to see that in a second. Okay, is everyone able to see that? Excellent. So this is the application form here. So this application form, which is an eForm, is available to download from the Apply for Youth Partnership Funding page of the Erasmus Plus website. You should save it as a PDF to your PC. Please check that you've downloaded the correct application form for the second round of 2016. As mentioned on the slide just now, you can check this by doing the following. So you can see section B, context here. So under Key Action, it should be Cooperation for Innovation and the Exchange of Good Practices. Under Field, it should be Strategic Partnerships for Youth. Under Call, it should be 2016. And under Round, it should be Round 2. As I go through the application form, I will use a scroll bar to scroll up and down the page to the relevant sections of the form. I will concentrate on hints and tips for each section of the form as we go through the sections, rather than describing all the information needed, and I will then concentrate on the sections dealing with project activities and budget, showing how these link to each other, as well as giving you hints and tips on how to complete them. An important feature in the Key Action 2 application forms for 2016 is that you need to decide what the main objective of your project is, and based on that choice, certain sections of the application form will appear or disappear. So here is a drop-down menu. The two options are development of innovation and exchange of practices. So I'm going to choose development of innovation. We will start off by showing you what the eForm looks like for development of innovation, and then we'll show you the differences with the exchange of practices. You will also need to select the language you're using to complete the application form from the drop-down menu. For applications made to the UK/NA, this should always be English. You'll need to input your start date and choose the duration of your project, which will automatically fill in the end date for you. The start date for round 2 should be between 1st of September 2016 and 31st of January 2017. However, please note that the latest end date for your project is 31st of August 2019. I'm going to scroll down to section C. Here, you will have to select the most relevant horizontal or sectoral priority for your project. As you can see, your main priority should be a horizontal or youth priority if you are applying in the field of youth. If you choose a horizontal one, you will need to explain how it links to the youth field specifically. If your application addresses a horizontal priority, inclusive education, training and youth, it will be considered as highly relevant. However, you will need to make sure it's in line with the objectives of your project. You can select 2 more priorities, and here you can also select other fields in case your application has a cross-sectoral approach. So I'm going to select a youth priority. There we go. I'm going to scroll down to section D now. Section D.1 is for your organisation as the applicant. Sections D.2 onwards are for any partner organisations that will be included in the project. Remember, when you put in your PIC and your partner's PIC numbers, the information will automatically populate from the information from the participant portal. So I'm going to press the check PIC button. Check the details, and if you notice any details are incorrect for you or your partner, they will need to be corrected in the portal. You should also check that the information in the partner mandates matches the information in this section for you and your partner's organisation details. If any of the information in the mandate doesn't match the application form, you'll need to go back to your partner to amend the mandate. Please note that all participating organisations need to be identified in the application form, and you won't be able to add partners at a later stage. It's also important to remember that a better quality application form will be specific and name staff members who will be delivering the project and their skills. Please explain how your organisation's previous experience of delivering project or activities has built the skills and knowledge needed for the activities that you propose in this application. Moreover, include details of the young people your organisation typically works with in terms of geographic location and any additional needs they might have if you feel that this information is relevant. Also, please explain how the activities proposed in this application fit into other programmes or activities that you deliver. This will help the assessors to understand how the proposal is innovative or complementary to other initiatives that your organisation is already involved in. And finally, make sure it's clear from the description of each partner's work and expertise why they have been chosen to participate in your project. This applies to all partners, including smaller organisations which will be involved. Each page of the application has a validate button, so you can check information as you go. At the bottom of the page here. This will identify if any mandatory sections have been missed and any errors in the way the information has been input. As you can see, we need to select what type of organisation our applicant is. I'm going to press validate again. You can see that the form directs us to the next error or box where there is information missing. In this case, the email address is not in the correct format. Okay. So now we're in section E, which is description of the project. As well as the description of the project, your application will be of a higher quality if you explain the rationale behind the project and if you can demonstrate that your project is based on a genuine needs analysis that you or one of your stakeholders or partners has done. Including details of this can also show why you have included certain partners, which would help the assessors understand the choice, which is after all one of the criteria that they're assessing. Make sure you demonstrate that for each transnational face-to-face partner meeting is necessary for achieving the results of the project. Make sure that the number of partner meetings is appropriate, as assessors consider that hosting more than one partner meeting each could be excessive unless well justified. Show that the planned participants are appropriate to the project activities, as this will support your request for budget under the Transnational Project Meetings heading. Make sure that your results fit with the objectives of the project and that they are realistic and achievable. You should provide details of which partners will be involved in producing each result and when they will become available. Make sure that you know what is meant by results. Go to page 301 of the programme guide for the Commission's definition. If you're unsure about what a strategic partnership project can be, have a look at page 285 of the programme guide, which gives examples of strategic partnerships. For youth, page 287 gives a good example. This is section E.1, participants. Double check the definition of participants with fewer opportunities on your handout to make sure you're aware of what this covers. If your project focuses on a transnational youth initiative, and any of the young people designing and delivering the project have a background of fewer opportunities, you should look at the programme guide on page 284, as you can plan for a coach to support them. Remember, a coach is compulsory if under 18s are involved in the delivery of a transnational youth initiative. This is in addition to a project leader. Okay, now we're at section F. Here you'll need to mention any preparatory activities that will take place before the start of your project activities, including practical arrangements and also including anything that you've done so far before putting in your application. But please remember that funding cannot cover any costs made before the start date of your project. Under section F.1, please give as much detail as you can in this section. For example, when describing your monitoring activities, mention how you will coordinate activities within the partnership and how you will identify and resolve any risks within your project. The best quality projects will use qualitative and quantitative indicators of achievement in order to assess whether and to what extent the project has achieved its objectives and results, which help to demonstrate the impact of your project. If you have these, please give details in this section. List the indicators and attach numerical targets to quantitative indicators wherever possible, and who will analyse these. Examples of indicators include measures of skill levels attained to establish the impact of new methods on participants and measures of the quality of the results produced. Methods to measure achievement may include surveys, web analytics, and interviews. The numbering of the sections, we're at section G now. The numbering of the sections from the implementation section onwards will change depending on the sections that you select to complete. You should ensure that the activities selected are relevant to the type of project that you plan to deliver and to its objectives, and make sure that all the relevant sections are completed. We're going to cover this section in more detail as it relates to the activities which will feed into the budget. It's very important to keep in mind that the data here will need to correspond to the data in the budget section, otherwise you'll not be able to validate your eForm. As we've selected development of innovation in section B, section G.1 intellectual outputs will appear here, as you can see just at the bottom of the page. Intellectual outputs are substantial and high quality, tangible outcomes. Each intellectual output is a total result, not a process to reach a result. It can be a product such as curricula, pedagogical and youth work materials, open educational resources, IT tools, analyses, studies or peer learning methods. Dissemination plans or project evaluation reports are not considered as intellectual outputs. So, for instance, a general project website is not considered an intellectual output, and costs related to a website will be covered under the Project Management and Implementation budget heading. Under Development of Innovation projects, we would normally expect you to develop intellectual outputs. Therefore, you would select Yes from the drop-down menu to generate the relevant parts of the application that you need to complete. You must ensure that any intellectual outputs listed meet the eligibility criteria and clearly explain the resources that you will need to produce the planned intellectual outputs, as this will be essential to justify your budget request. If you're not planning to develop any intellectual outputs as part of your project, you should consider whether it would be more appropriate to select exchange of practices as the main objective of your project under Section B, Context. I'll now show you how to complete this section to make sure that the budget section of the application form completes correctly. You'll need to include a title, a description of the intellectual output, as well as describe the prep work and methodology for the intellectual output. We recommend you include details here of the type of staff and days required to complete these outcomes to prevent potential overlap with manager and administrative staff costs, which should normally be covered under project management and implementation. In addition, if you need to use any subcontractors or to purchase specialist equipment to produce the intellectual output, you will need to make it clear in this section. To demonstrate that intellectual outputs are substantial, it may be helpful to explain how you have calculated the resources needed for each intellectual output. You'll also need to indicate when you will start and end working on the intellectual output, as well as show which languages the intellectual output will be available in, what type of media it is, and which organisations will be working on it.
Right, okay, so I will talk you through the information Phoebe is inputting into the form at the moment. The fields for output title, description, and task and methodology are mandatory, so we are just writing tests in here for the purpose of this demonstration. Phoebe is just selecting start and end dates, and will choose the language the intellectual output will be produced in. So Phoebe is just selecting the language, and then as well the format of the output. So selecting 2 languages and then media. Phoebe will also choose which organization will lead on the production of the intellectual outputs, and any other organizations in the partnership that will work on it.
Thank you, Natalia. If you make a mistake, you can remove the last option in the list. And you can add as many IOs as you need.
Okay, so just to show you how to complete the budget section later in the eForm, Phoebe is just adding a second intellectual output. You will see throughout the eForm that there are plus and minus buttons which will allow you to add an extra line or to remove the last line from the option, the way presenter did to remove a second language from the first intellectual output. There are also add and remove buttons if it's possible to add a whole extra activity under a particular budget heading, like Phoebe will do to second intellectual output. So Phoebe is just selecting again languages for that particular second output. And media as well again. And then any leading and participating organizations that will work on the development of the output.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. So I've completed those. And I'm going to scroll down. So multiplier events are only applicable if you plan to deliver intellectual outputs, and they must be national or transnational events aimed specifically at disseminating intellectual outputs. So if there are no intellectual outputs, there can be no multiplier events, and this question won't appear in the application form. Examples of multiplier events are national or transnational conferences, seminars and events. Training courses, webinars and meetings are not considered as multiplier events. A very important point here is that multiplier events cannot take place before an intellectual output has been at least partially developed. The main goal of the multiplier events is the dissemination of and general support for intellectual outputs. They can be used to disseminate other project results as well, but this should never be their main purpose. Multiplier events must take place in the countries of the organisations participating in the project. They can also take place at the seat of an institution of the EU, i.e. Brussels, Frankfurt, Luxembourg, Strasbourg or The Hague, even if none of the participating organisations is from Belgium, Germany, Luxembourg, France or the Netherlands. Only participants from organisations other than the beneficiary organisations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purposes of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, i.e. from the country where the event is taking place, or international, i.e. from other countries. If you're planning to include multiplier events, choose Yes from the drop-down menu to generate the multiplier events part of the application.
Okay, so I will talk you through again through the information that Phoebe is inputting to the section of the multiplier event. And just like with intellectual output, you will need to include a title and description for any multiplier events. So Phoebe is just inputting tests for the demonstration. We're going to choose the UK for the country the event will take place in, as the lead is the UK organization. For the dates, please remember that multiplier event should take place after an intellectual output is finished or almost finished. As Phoebe mentioned before, all multiplier events must be linked to intellectual outputs. So we will select first intellectual output. You will also need to select which organizations are participating in the event. Phoebe she's just selecting now one organization as the lead and the other organization as participant.
You'll also need to select the country the event is taking place in and which IOs will be disseminated. You can add as many multiplier events as you need, but funding is limited to a maximum of €30,000 per project. So I'm just going to add a second event.
Okay, so as Phoebe is adding second multiplier event, I will talk you through this again. So this is just to so that we can easily show you how the budget is completed. Okay, so Phoebe has just inputted again the title, country of venue, start and end dates. And now we'll select again which intellectual output will be covered. With this event, we've selected the other organization as the lead. Since this organization is based in Finland, we've chosen Finland for the country. Just to highlight once again that plus and minus buttons allow you to add and remove rows from each item under the multiplier event you add.
Thank you, Natalia. Give me a second, I'm just going to have a glass of water. Okay, the next section is learning, teaching and training activities. These can be included if they are clearly linked to the project objectives. For example, you might include piloting of your intellectual outputs with the appropriate target group if this involves a mobility aspect. The programme guide lists eligible activities and duration on pages 111, 114 and 280 onwards. If you include learning, teaching and training activities, you should clearly explain how they support the achievement of your project objectives and whether you plan to use any EU tools such as YouthPass or any national instruments to validate the learning outcomes of the participants. We would strongly encourage you to consider using YouthPass, which will in turn strengthen your application in respect to the quality of the tools for validating participants' learning outcomes. Hints and tips for the implementation section. One area in which some previous applicants struggled to describe well is non-formal and informal learning. These are the learning methods associated with the field of youth. Therefore, it's important to show that your activities will use non-formal and informal learning methods to stimulate creativity, active participation, and initiative. Hopefully, you all know what the terms informal and non-formal learning mean, but the Commission has given definitions in the glossary on pages 305 to 312, which can be found at the end of the programme guide. If you're planning to include learning, teaching and training activities, choose Yes from the drop-down menu to generate and complete this part of the application. You'll need to choose the appropriate field and activity type and provide a detailed description. If your project is only focused on youth, then we would expect to see activities only in the field of youth. The other fields are available as options if you're planning a cross-field project with a focus on youth. It's important to explain how the activity is adding value for the project and linked to its objectives.
Okay, so once again, I will talk you through the information for learning, teaching and training activity as Phoebe is included in it. So we've chosen youth as the field and the blended mobility of young people as the activity type. As a reminder, the program guide contains information about the different types of activities that are possible for each field. When you input the number of participants, this is the total number of activity which includes participants with special needs and any accompanied persons. You will need to input the duration in either days or months, which depend on the activity type you selected. Since Phoebe is chosen an activity that only has short duration, the box for months is grayed out and can't be typed in. To demonstrate how this changes, Phoebe is changing the activity to one which allows long-term durations. Now the durations in days is grayed out and can't be typed in. So Phoebe is just adding participating organizations.
Thank you, Natalia. Like with intellectual outputs and multiplier events, you can add as many learning, teaching and training activities that you like with the Add Activity button. Please be aware that long-term teaching and training assignments should include participants from beneficiary organisations from at least 2 different programme countries. Now I'm going to scroll down to section H. Hints and tips here are: please remember that impact is a very important element in Erasmus Plus projects, and you must therefore show the importance of your proposal on your target groups and beyond, as well as on a local, regional, national and European level. Also, please be aware that at assessment stage, in case 2 projects score the same, we will be looking to compare the individual scores under the impact and dissemination quality criterion. Think about any added value of realising this project on a European level and put this here. Plan for any dissemination activities to take part throughout your project lifetime and not just at the end. Have a look at Annex 2 of the programme guide, which provides practical guidance on dissemination of your project. Demonstrate that dissemination will reach and engage all your partners, stakeholders and wider network. Make sure it's clear that your plans for sharing results of your project do not contain disproportionate limitations to free access from the public. If you do intend to introduce any limitations, you will need to explain and justify them here. Section I, budget, which we're just going to scroll down to now. You will find more detailed guidance on how to complete the budget section in our application guidance and in Part B of the programme guide. Getting the budget right is a quality criterion. Projects with a correct and duly justified budget are more likely to score highly than those that do not. The maximum total grant available for any strategic partnership in the field of youth is €450,000, which comes down to €12,500 per month, multiplied by a maximum duration of 36 months. However, the amount you request depends on your activities. It's important to note that the budget under all cost headings is built up on a unit cost basis per participant, except for exceptional costs and special needs support, which are budgeted for and reimbursed on the basis of actual costs. Unit costs are a set amount per participant, which is a contribution towards the cost. For some unit costs, you will spend more, and for some, perhaps less than the unit cost. The unit costs are used to help make the funding simpler to understand and manage. Actual or real cost. As the name suggests, you will receive funding for a proportion of the actual costs incurred. Real costs are always used for the budget headings exceptional costs and special needs support. However, you cannot always claim the full amount. For special needs support, you can claim up to 100% of the eligible costs. For exceptional costs, this is only up to 75% of the eligible costs. One exception to this are exceptional costs for travel from outermost regions and overseas territories for participants in learning, teaching and training activities, which amounts to up to 80% of eligible costs. All projects will have at least project management and implementation and the transnational partner meeting budgets. So section I.1 here, project management and implementation, which is based on a unit cost. This component of the grant is a contribution to general project management and smaller scale project implementation activities, such as project management, that's planning, managing finances, coordination, and communication between the partners. Smaller scale learning, teaching, and training materials, tools, and approaches. Virtual cooperation and local project activities, for example, classroom project work with learners, youth work activities, organisation and mentoring of embedded learning training activities. Smaller scale information promotion and dissemination activities, for example, brochures, leaflets and websites. Costs linked to the implementation of transnational youth initiatives. The amount payable is based on the duration of the strategic partnership and the number of partners involved. €500 per month is payable as a contribution to the activities of the coordinating organisation, and €250 per month for each participating organisation, up to a maximum total of €2,750 per month. You will note that in the case of projects involving more than 10 participating organisations, this component of the grant will be limited to the equivalent payable for 10 participating organisations. That's 1 coordinator and 9 partners. Otherwise, this would be over the maximum. As you can see, this section of the budget is automatically completed based on the number of organisations that were included in section D at the beginning of the application form. Section I.2 is transnational project meetings, which is again based on a unit cost. This component of the grant is a contribution to travel and subsistence costs for meetings hosted by the participating organisations. You will need to click the plus button to create a line for each partner. Costs are based on 3 distance bands. You will need to use the distance calculator to fill this out. A link to this is provided in the guidance to applicants. The distance is from cities and towns, so choose the nearest one to your head office and the head office of your partners. The band that comes up is the band which you will need to input into the application form. This will then automatically populate with the unit cost. This cost is a contribution towards the return journey costs. Please ensure that you put in the right band, as this will be checked at assessment, and if incorrect, could affect the quality of the application.
Okay, so as Phoebe is inputting the information about the partner meetings that each organization will attend, please bear in mind that if you are having, for example, 5 partner meetings hosted by each partner, then you would complete this section with 4 partner meetings each, rather than 5, as each partner will host 1 meeting and attend 4 meetings. This sounds obvious, but again, this is a common mistake and could affect the quality of your application. So, in this example, there are a total of 2 meetings planned, with each partner hosting 1.
I'm now going to switch to the distance calculator to work out the correct distance band. Here we go.
Okay, so the distance calculator works by you inputting the town or city that will be the point of departure and arrival for the partner meetings. Our test organizations are based in Birmingham and Helsinki. As you can see, Phoebe starts to type the name of the location and the distance calculator suggests locations. Clicking the calculate button provides the distance in kilometers, and it is this number which dictates which distance part you need to select. Phoebe will now switch back to the application form to input this information.
Okay, I'm back on the application form.
So Phoebe will quickly just input the distance part now.
Okay. After inputting the information about the organisations, numbers of meetings and participants, and the distance band, the amounts per participant and in total will automatically generate. So you can see that that's happened here. So section I.3 is intellectual outputs. That's based on a unit cost. The funding can only be used for staff costs for the organisations directly involved in the production of the intellectual outputs, and this must be clearly justified in the body of the application. Important to mention here is that the staff costs for managers and administrative staff are expected to be covered already under project management and implementation, unless the development of the intellectual output is identified as a distinctive separate role for managers and administrative staff in question. But this should be very clearly justified. If not, these costs will be cut.
So Phoebe will now add the budget information for the two intellectual outputs that we created earlier on in the application form. As Phoebe said, the information you add in the budget should be clearly reflected in the earlier section. Phoebe just added 5 rows using the plus button. You should use a new row for any change in the organization, intellectual output, staff category, or number of days to ensure the budget completes correctly. As you can see, Phoebe has included a small number of manager days for intellectual output 1. As she mentioned, if you do include any manager or administrative days, please clearly justify this, otherwise they might be cut. As Phoebe completes each row, you can see that the budget is automatically filled in. So Phoebe now just completes the last row.
Okay, the cost generated by the category of staff and number of days should be clearly linked to the description of the intellectual outputs that we put in section G earlier. Now I'm going to scroll down to section I.4, multiply events, which are again based on a unit cost. This budget heading is only applicable to projects planning to organise national and/or transnational events aimed at disseminating intellectual outputs produced by the project. Therefore, a project which does not plan to deliver intellectual outputs cannot be awarded funding under this budget heading. Please be aware that the costs for travel and subsistence of the representatives of the participating organisations are not included in this. Important to note as well is that only participants from organisations other than the beneficiary organisations can be counted in the number of individuals for the purposes of determining the grant amount. These participants can be local, meaning from the country where the event is taking place, or international, so from other countries. The cost should be clearly linked to the description of the multiplier event in section G above, and as mentioned earlier on, multiplier events should not take place before intellectual outputs have been developed. The costs are calculated on a unit cost basis up to a maximum of €30,000 per project.
Phoebe will now add the budget information for the two multiplier events. Once again, it is important to use a different row based on different information that you are entering. For multiplier event, you should use a different row for any change in the organization and the multiplier event. You don't need to use a different row for local and international participants as long as the organization and multiplier event are the same. As you can see, Phoebe has used one row for my organization and 2 rows for KIMO, since KIMO will be including participants in both multiplier events. This is also why KIMO has international participants for multiplier event number 1, and this event will be based in the UK and their participants will be from Finland.
Thank you, Natalia. So now we are on to section I.5, which is learning, teaching and training activities, which are again based on a unit cost. Funding should only be requested under these budget headings where your project intends to deliver transnational training, teaching or learning activities within the strategic partnership. The added value of these mobility activities needs to be addressed in the body of the application form. There are a few subheadings under this section. First one is travel. This is a contribution to the travel costs of participants, including accompanying persons from their place of origin to the venue of activity and the return journey. You'll also have to use a distance calculator for this, but the form uses different rates when you enter the distance.
So Phoebe will be now inputting the travel information using a row for the participants from each organization. Obviously, when you are completing your application form, you would need to use a distance calculator again to check which distance bands to use. Phoebe has made sure that the number of participants included here matches the total number of participants included earlier in the form. This is very important because any inconsistencies here would either affect your grant requested or even prevent the form from validating.
Okay, the next section is I.5.2, which is individual support. Here, the contribution for participants partaking in any long-term or short-term learning, teaching and training activities will be calculated, depending on the duration of the activity. Accompanying persons should be listed separately on the right-hand side.
Since the activity which was earlier was for the long-term duration, Phoebe is completing the long-term section. The form will not allow you to add short-term activity under the long-term section. If you are trying to complete the long-term section and no learning, teaching and training activities are available for you to choose, you should check the earlier section of the form to make sure you selected the correct activity and input the correct duration in the correct box. Once again, Phoebe has made sure that the number of participants and accompanied persons matches the information in the earlier section of the form.
Thank you, Natalia. So the next section is linguistic support. This is a contribution to the costs associated with language support. Linguistic support can be offered to participants to improve their knowledge of the language of the host country in order to support their active participation. Any costs requested under this budget heading must be clearly justified within the body of the application. The application won't allow you to request linguistic support if you don't have a learning, teaching and training activity that meets the minimum duration. So I'm just filling this out. There you can see that the form fills out for me when I start inputting the information. If you need to add linguistic support but the form won't let you, you should check section G where you input all of the learning, teaching and training activities details. So if I scroll down, this is exceptional costs for overseas countries and territories travel costs. If you plan to organise long-term teaching and training assignments and you want to involve participants from outermost regions and overseas countries and territories, then it's possible to request extra funding for travel for these participants. You will have to indicate what organisation the participants are linked to and which activity that they will partake in. Make sure that you clearly justify why you are requesting these costs. It's important to note here that the number of participants need to match the numbers put into the descriptive part in section G. If this is not the case, the form will not validate, so please double check this. I.6 is special needs support, which is based on a real cost. This budget heading is only applicable if you plan to involve participants with special needs in your project, resulting in additional costs. This component of the grant is based on an estimate of the likely actual costs relating specifically to the needs of participants with disabilities. In the budget section, you will need to identify the activities that the requested costs relate to. The participation of individuals with special needs must also be justified in the main body of the application form. You can claim up to 100% of these real costs. So I'm going to fill this out for you so you can see how it's completed. There we go. As a reminder, a person with special needs is defined under Erasmus Plus as a potential participant whose physical, mental or health-related situation is such that his or her participation in the project would not be possible without extra financial support. So section 5.7 is exceptional costs, and again this is based on a real cost. This budget heading relates exclusively to actual costs related to subcontracting or the purchase of goods or services that cannot be delivered or provided by the organisations participating in the project for duly justified reasons. Any costs requested under this heading must be clearly justified within the application, as I mentioned earlier. Where such costs are justified, 75% of the eligible costs will be payable, up to a maximum of €50,000 per project. As mentioned before, exceptional costs related to travel of participants from out of regions and overseas countries and territories will fall under category 1.5.4 above. We have had previous applicants budgeting for visa costs for partners, staff and participants under this category. However, visa costs are not considered exceptional costs under this specific key action. If they are for staff members of the participating organisations, they should be covered under project management and implementation. If they are for participants attending a multiplier event, they should come under that category. If participants in learning, teaching and training activities need a visa, you will need to absorb this in the costs associated with these activities. In respect to the special needs support and exceptional cost description, the application form allows you to write up to 5,000 characters, so please ensure that any requests for these costs are clearly described and justified within the application form. Now I'm going to go down to section J, which is project summary. Here we go. This summary will be used by the European Commission and the National Agency in their publication, and will also feed into the Erasmus Plus project results platform, so it should be written with this in mind. It should be written in clear, plain English, avoiding any technical or sector-specific jargon to ensure that it can be understood by the general public. So I'm going to scroll down to section J.I here, J.2 and J2.1. Check that the information here is absolutely correct, so in case it's not, you can make amendments in the earlier section. Make sure that your grant requested does not exceed the maximum allowable grant, which is €12,500 multiplied by the amount of months that you apply for. Go to scroll down to section M now. Here we go. Compulsory annexes are the signed declaration of honour, the scanned mandates for each participating organisation to the applicant, signed by both parties, and the completed timetable of activities or project timetable spreadsheet. These documents can be downloaded from the Apply for Youth Partnership Funding page of the Erasmus Plus website. Your project application will be ineligible without the first two of these attachments. The lack of a completed timetable of activities or project timetable spreadsheet will mean that your application will receive a lower score under project management and implementation, so please don't forget this. I'm now going to switch to a completed timetable. Here we go. The timetable uses the same letters that appear in the application for intellectual outputs, multiplier events, and learning, teaching and training activities. Some activities don't have a letter in the application, but these are explained in the box underneath the timetable. It's a good idea to use these letters throughout your application when covering any project management and implementation activities, such as Skype meetings, local project activities, dissemination activities, etc. As you can see, we've coloured the cells to show you which months each activity takes place in. This should correspond to the information that you include in your application form. Okay? If there is still some room for attachments once these three are attached, you're able to attach other relevant annexes such as the needs analysis and a sample work programme, for example. A tip here is to keep it concise. We expect all the information that is key to the quality and content of your project to be included within the main body of the application form. Now, before we continue on to the submission part, we just want to show you what happens if you select exchange of practices as the main objective of your project. So I'm going to scroll back up to section B, context. Here we go. So I've selected exchange of practices. And I'm now going to scroll down again to section G to show you. Okay, up until section G, implementation, the eForm looks the same as how we filled it in earlier. As you can see, the sections for intellectual outputs and multiplier events are missing. The application form jumps straight to learning, teaching and training activities, and the numbering is therefore slightly different. So now I'm going to scroll down to the budget. Here as well, you can see that the multiplier events, the intellectual outputs and multiplier events are missing. I'm going to scroll down to section O, which is submission. Here we go. Some hints and tips here. Validate as you go and after completing the application. So I'm going to validate that now. You'll be taken to any sections which are incorrect or have been missed. These will need to be resolved before you can submit the form. So I'm going to type test in here. I'm going to validate the form again. So it says now that the form is valid. Also, you'll need to refer to section K, the checklist, which is here, and read the data protection notice, which is section L here. You'll need to ensure that you're connected to the internet when you submit your application form, and save the final completed version of your application form to your PC in case of any submission issues. Note that the deadline mentioned in the form is Brussels time. The form needs to be submitted online by 11 AM UK time on Tuesday the 26th of April 2016. We would advise you to leave plenty of time in completing your application and submitting it online before the deadline in case of any unexpected technical difficulties. Okay, so once we've received your application, we will check the eligibility of your application. Your application will not go forward to assessment if your start and end date, as well as the project duration, are not in line with the criteria specified in the programme guide. That's on page 113. Your budget contribution requested from Erasmus Plus is more than the maximum, or you do not have the minimum number of programme country partners, or if you submitted your application after 11 AM UK time on the 26th of April 2016. As part of the assessment process, the NA will also check that the requested budget is in line with the funding rules set out in Part B of the programme guide. If these rules are not respected, your requested budget may be reduced on assessment. Please make sure that you read the programme guide and the national agency guidance available on our website carefully for further details on the eligibility requirements before you submit your application. The Erasmus Plus national agencies will be validating your organisation and your partner organisations. However, this is a separate process and not linked to the assessment of your application. Therefore, your organisation being validated does not imply a successful outcome of your application. During the validation process, we will check whether all of the information you input into the participant portal is complete and correct. We will check whether the required legal and financial forms have been uploaded, as well as the supporting documents. The verification of the financial capacity does not apply to public bodies and international organisations. In case of EU grant requests submitted by other types of organisations and not exceeding €60,000, you must provide a declaration on their honour certifying that you have the financial capacity to implement the project. This declaration of honour constitutes a specific section of the application form. In case of EU grant requests submitted by other types of organisations and exceeding €60,000, you must submit your organisation's most recent profit and loss account and a balance sheet. For entities which cannot provide the above documents because they are newly created, a financial declaration or an insurance declaration stating the applicant's professional risks may replace the above document. Please note, organisations that are not validated may not be able to take part in Erasmus Plus funded projects. You or your partners not being able to provide the correct or complete documents can cause significant delays to the contracting process and can even result in the NA withdrawing its offer of funding. Therefore, please ensure you're clear about the requirements and communicate these to your partners as early as possible. Some key points to remember about the budget. The maximum budget is a variable amount defined by multiplying 12,500 per month for the duration of the project with a maximum of €450,000 for 36 months. The grant is a contribution to project costs based on either unit costs or real cost budget items. When a contribution is based on unit costs, funding will be automatically calculated depending on the unit. This can be an amount of participants for a certain duration, or a set cost per distance travelled, for example. Budget headings using unit costs are project management and implementation, transnational project meetings, intellectual outputs, and multiplier events. Under long-term learning, teaching and training assignments, travel, individual support, and linguistic support are also contributions to unit costs. Contributions based on real costs is for the following budget headings: special needs support and exceptional costs, as well as exceptional costs under learning, teaching and training assignments. Special needs support can amount up to 100% of eligible costs. For exceptional costs, this is 75%. For expensive travel costs of participants from outermost regions and overseas countries and territories under learning, teaching and training assignments, you can request up to 80% of eligible costs. Your budget should be appropriate to your activity and demonstrate cost-effective use of resources. Several of the budget lines are conditional on you demonstrating added value, and you will need to clearly justify, especially for real costs, why you are requesting a certain amount of funding. Please note, for strategic partnerships supporting exchange of good practice, it's not possible to request budget for intellectual outputs or multiplier events. The following documents must be annexed to the application form: the declaration of honour signed by the legal representative mentioned in the application, the mandate of each partner to the applicant signed by both parties and with the information identical to the information about the partners in the application form, and the timetable of activities template. We recommend that you scan different documents together into a single file. If, after checking that the annexes are within the size and file format limits, you still experience problems with attaching annexes, you can email them to erasmusplus@ecoris.com, clearly stating which application form they relate to by providing the application hash code and your organisation's details and project name. But please only do this as an exception and ensure that you followed all the available guidance first. You must ensure that you validated all sections of the application before you submit. You will need to ensure that you're connected to the internet in order to submit your completed application. You should also ensure that all sections of the form are valid and all annexes are attached before submitting the form. If there are any technical issues preventing the form from being submitted, it will say error under status. If this happens and you're unable to submit the form, you should follow the alternative submission procedure as described in the guide for applicants. In this case, you can still submit your application by sending it to us via email within the 2 hours following the official deadline. However, the UK National Agency will only accept this submission if the error message is recorded under status in the submission summary section of the eForm, with a timestamp prior to or on the deadline date or time. The following error messages, however, are not accepted as technical issues. Error 01. This error relates to invalid data or missing fields in the application form. This is not considered to be a technical issue and can be rectified by correcting the application form and validating it again. Error 06. This error means that there are errors with the annexes, meaning the total size of the attachments exceeds 5 megabytes, or they are not in the accepted file format specified in section N of the application form. This can be rectified either by reducing the size of the attachments or by removing them. Unknown. This error means that the eForm was not submitted and no submission attempts were made. Local 01. In order to submit the eForm, you must click the appropriate options in the yellow security warning bar at the top of the form. Local 02. In order to submit the eForm, you should check your internet connection and try to submit the form again, or try a different network connection. Please note that the National Agency is aware of a potential issue with the eForm. If your application does not include any teaching, training and learning activities, you may receive an error message, error 01 submission validation error, when you try to validate and submit the application. To find out how to rectify this error, please refer to the latest version of our guide for applicants, which is available on our website. We hope that this issue will be resolved in the next release of the eForm expected shortly, so keep an eye on the website for further information and updated guidance. A couple more hints and tips before we conclude. Before and while you complete your application, refer to the Commission's documents, first of all the Programme Guide, and the National Agency's own guidance available from our website. If you have applied before, don't forget to review the feedback you've received from us, as this will include key areas of improvement which will enhance your chances of submitting a good quality application. Please remember that only one application can be submitted by the same partnership under the 26th of April deadline. Save the form frequently so that no information is lost. Ensure correct options are selected on the application form so that important sections aren't deleted. As I've said while looking through the application form, double check that the budget you request is accurate and well justified, and that you respect the maximum amounts allowed. Provide relevant answers to the questions in the application, but remember that there is a character limit on many of the sections. You can see the limit by hovering your mouse over the answer boxes. A good idea is to get someone else to proofread your application and annexes, perhaps against the published award criteria. Leave enough time for completing and submitting your application before the KA2 Youth Round 2 deadline of the 26th of April 2016. So, to conclude, I'd like to remind you of the support that the UK National Agency will be offering in the run-up to the 26th of April deadline for applications to be submitted under Key Action 2 Youth. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you in the next couple of days. After this webinar, you will be redirected to a feedback form. Please do fill this out, as we aim to continuously improve these webinars and have taken previous feedback on board when creating the webinars for this round. A detailed guide for applicants on how to fill out the application form will be available on our website. If you haven't done so already, please do sign up for our newsletter, as this provides all the most up-to-date information about the call and about the Erasmus Plus programme. On our website, you can find other key documents, for example, the timetable of activities, so we recommend you to have a look at those. We recommend that you have a look at the assessment criteria listed in the Guide for Assessors. This will give you an indication of what the assessors are looking for in your project application. We also have a helpline where our team is available to answer your questions about your KA2 youth application. Thank you all for your attention and participation. We'll be around for a couple more minutes to answer any final questions, and if there are any more that come up, please contact us via the erasmusplus@ecoris.com email address or the number on this screen. As said, our team is also available every day from Monday to Friday to answer any queries you may have via the erasmusplus@ecoris.com inbox or a helpline. You can see the number on the slide and you can find it in your handout as well. If there are any questions that we haven't managed to answer during the session this afternoon, we will get back to you by email afterwards. Also, do keep an eye on the Erasmus Plus website for news and further guidance. We hope you found the session useful today, and we wish you luck with your future applications.